Lent can be a great time to consider your finances. We do just that on this episode of The Catholic Money Show. Welcome back to another episode of The Catholic Money Show, where we help you infuse your finances with your faith. And it's Lent, of course, and what a better time. Is there any better time to really take a look at your finances and maybe apply a little bit of prayer to them, some fasting, some almsgiving, certainly. We were recently on an episode of Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio where we discussed all these things. We talked about investing. We talked about finances, and we even answered a few questions and talked a little bit about adoption. So not exactly a financial topic, but one we are certainly passionate about, to say the least. I'd love to play that interview for you now. So without any further ado, this is our recent appearance on Trending with Timmerie. Enjoy.
So, what's trending? Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio.
Talk about Catholic financial tips. This is a win. We have guests today from Wallet Win who will join me diving into investments, what's happening with investments, and tips they might have, especially with the changing market as it has been. Also, using Lent to spruce up your finances, making good decisions, making moral decisions, but being good stewards of what God has given us, or sometimes what he hasn't given us, and how we navigate those seasons. My guests today are Jonathan and Amanda Texera, which, by the way, after diving into some great financial tips, they'll be sharing part of their journey of how they made their way to adoption. They have beautiful children, all of whom were adopted after facing infertility challenges. And so they'll share a little bit about how they came into adoption, what that has been like for them. So buckle up. It's a great conversation. They come from walletwin.com. Jonathan and Amanda, it's great to have you back on today, especially as people are kind of swirling surrounding what investments could or should look like in 2025 with a changing market. And I'd love to hear some of your thoughts about growing concerns, everything from will the interest rates continue to drop? Will I see a volatile market with President Trump's policies over what we saw over the last 4 years? Or is the stock market going to continue this climb that has happened over the last month or so?
Thank you for having us on. It's always a pleasure to be here. I'm looking forward to all of the topics that we are going to cover here today. But to start off with investing. Well, I don't have my crystal ball to consult. And if I did, I don't think that would probably be a good choice for my soul. So all of that said, we just don't know what the future is going to hold when it comes to investing. The fortunate thing is, however, that for most of us, our investment activity is primarily focused towards our retirement, towards a long timeline. So whatever is going to happen over the next 4 weeks, the next 4 years, will kind of average out over hopefully the next 4, maybe 4 decades or 2 decades, or however much time that you've got until you're going to be drawing it. So right now, maybe we're going to go up a good bit, and maybe we're going to go down. But in the future, and maybe I can guarantee this, the market and any holdings that you might have in the market are going to go up. They are also going to go down. And so it's just about having your plan, sticking to it, and as much as you can, not being overly emotional in your decisions and your management of any investments that you have. I would say that the most important thing when we're looking at investments is not necessarily what's happening with the market and what's this and that, but what are we invested in? How moral are these companies and their activities, which through owning stock in them, we own part of the company. That's maybe it's a 1/10 millionth or something, but that is 1/10 millionth my company. And so if that's your company, are you happy with the way they're running things? And there's going to be some companies that maybe because of what they are doing or what they're not doing, it's something you do not want to have any ownership in. Maybe what they're doing, it's at a level where, you know what? I think maybe if I was an owner, I could speak into things a little bit more. And through my shareholder votes and banding together with other people who think the same as me, maybe we can bring about some changes in how they do business and help
Mhm.
them do more good. And then
Mhm.
lastly, I'm going to seek out those investments that are doing good in the
Mhm.
world through certainly how they are uh, treating their employees, or how they are operating, but then also just through their businesses if they are doing a good thing. And that's all just following the example of our bishops. They've put out the socially responsible investment guidelines for the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. I guess they have some investments, and so they have this guide that they've written for themselves to use. It's not necessarily a teaching document. It's just kind of showing us, hey, here's what we're doing with our money. Maybe, something to think about for yours. So I think it's a really great document to check out. I think it's very fascinating reading. And they go through, you want to avoid evil, you want to help make a change for good, and you want to support the good. And then they go into a lot of practicals of how they carry that out. And it doesn't need to be that complicated, but I think it does need to be something that every Catholic who is looking to invest needs to think about.
I was just thinking of a story that my mom has often shared about how there were a couple really great opportunities she had where she was investing in the stock market and ended up pulling out of some of these opportunities because in looking up the companies more or over time, some of what they did was changing. And for example, embryonic stem cells research, companies you would never
Yeah.
believe, this is something that they have huge corporate dollars going toward. And she said, I could have been a millionaire. We could have had all of this money, but because there was a very serious moral conundrum, I couldn't go there. I couldn't stay with that and write it out. And sometimes this is a tough place of being Catholic in the investing world, because on one side, I see some people like to kind of turn a blind eye to what could be happening. I was in a
Mhm.
conversation, I think about a year ago, and someone was sharing that they were getting ready to invest in a biotech company. And right away, I mean, they're pretty
Mm.
Catholic. I jump in and say, hold on a second. You're talking about biotech. What research are they doing? What are they involved in? And I was that person who just said, I pulled up their website and I said, well, look, and they had a significant association with stem cell research. And there was
Mm.
language that seemed very associative with abortion. I said, this is what I found with just a simple search. I'm going to give this to you. It's not my investment, but I would really look into this. I kind of, was backing down a little bit, thinking, okay, they need to do this on their own. I can't make that decision for them. But these are questions I think sometimes we just don't bring up when it comes to investing.
It's true. And I'm grateful that it seems like there's more and more Catholic influenced fintech is what they call it. Just new technologies, new investment opportunities that Catholic companies that have different financial advisors, or they're in the process right now as we speak. Nothing's been officially launched, but there's a variety of things that we personally know about that are going to give Catholics an opportunity to make investing a whole lot simpler. There's a lot of investing apps that are out there, but they don't do what you just mentioned, that ethical screening, that looking
Right.
under the hood for the morality. And a lot of these apps are going to start making that possible for Catholics, which is going to
Love
relieve a
that.
tremendous burden.
That's fantastic to know that. How far away is that from being accessible that we could discuss?
Uh, yeah, it's with certainly with some of them, with software, it always seems all right. We need to fix this one thing, and then we're ready to go. And then they keep finding things to fix.
Okay.
So we have been very eagerly awaiting one particular one for a while, but they are making progress. They just keep making more progress.
Okay.
So
Stay tuned. You
but
will
as
keep me
soon as
updated.
we would love to share as soon as it would make sense for folks, as soon as it's actionable.
I love that. And I kind of a flip side of investing that I think is very easy as well. Everyone wants a deal today. And so as you look at some of what's happening in the markets, whether it's housing, whether it's the stock market, all these different areas you could consider investing or you already have investments in. Part of the problem is sometimes we just want to wait for that best deal. And even just looking at interest rates, everyone talks about wanting low interest rates, but our interest rates actually have been low in comparison to other seasons. And so if you could speak just a little bit to finding maybe that moral balance between being stingy and holding out too long and, just burying that that coin, right, that you're giving. I think of some of the different parables we have of Christ, where you do nothing because you just hoard it and you don't want to do anything, or you could do the little bit that you could with what money you have to invest still.
Yeah, I would add that we teach the 12 money milestones. So these are a series of financial steps that you can take one after the next as you become the good steward that God's calling you to be. And really, whenever you get to that right step to buy a house, or that step where investment is the next logical step that you're going to take, then that's the right time for you. You know, the right action at the right time. It's okay if it's not going to be perfect. It's okay if maybe you could have gotten a better deal 6 months or a year down the road. All we know is right now, and we just make the best decision with the information we have in the present moment that we have. That's really it. That's the process of discernment.
And I love the example you mentioned. If this is when all the ducks fall in a row, that I can buy a house, and these are the circumstances we're in, maybe I wait a little bit longer, but this is where I'm at. You know, don't keep delaying certain things in life unnecessarily.
Yeah, we see a lot of people make decisions based around that, you know, whether it's openness to life or purchasing a home or making certain investments. And really, it's just, what is my present circumstance and the reality here? What's the likelihood it could shift or change? What's the risk if it does? And I'm just going to make the best decision I can with that information.
A question came in from Mike in Milwaukee. Said, what if I have well-performing mutual funds, but they may be using questionable companies? Am I culpable, and should I take my money out to put in other funds that don't perform as well?
Well, thank you for your question, Mike. Well, it sounds like you know at least a little bit of what's going on in there, right? Our level, now I don't have any big degrees or not some moral theologian or anything, but I'm pretty sure, you know, our level of culpability, one of the things that contributes to our culpability is our knowledge. So once you start understanding what's going on, and once we start maybe seeing things that are pricking our conscience, or that are kind of making our eyes bug out of our head, maybe depending on what we might find, I think that might be time to take some action. And I know maybe it's a tough thing to think about, because it is, yes, it's probably going to be a little bit more work to look into things and see what's going on, to find your alternatives, and to keep on top of it a little bit. But we have to keep in mind what our real end goal is. It's not a return. It's not a nest egg. It is our eternal home in heaven. And I don't know, you know, I'm not probably the one to say whether any particular investment is going to, you know, send you straight to heaven or damn you right to hell. But the way we handle our money probably plays a part in it. And if we are investing, especially if we know what we're doing, and I think if we are investing, we should know what we're doing or know what the money is up to. If we aren't handling that well, that's going to, it's not going to do well for us at the end of things. And so, you know what? Yes, I love a nice high return as much as anybody, but I want maybe the real return at the end to be as good as it can be.
And Jonathan, I think you kind of, go ahead.
I was just going to add something on there too, that I do think it's a false dichotomy sometimes to say that, gosh, if I want to invest in the moral and ethical stuff, I'm going to get a worse return. It's just not always that simple. Sometimes it takes a little bit of digging, and you got to know maybe the right, you know, financial advisor who can tip you off to certain things that are going on in the market. But you sometimes can find something even better performing just by going on that hunt or that journey. But if it does mean you get a % or two less over the long haul, it was worth it in the end.
And asking the Holy Spirit, like, help me. Okay, Lord, I see this is wrong, or this could go down a path I'm not okay with. Help me to know where to go. Like, truly, like, be confident in those decisions. We were just discussing yesterday with Father Nathan Cromley what the biggest challenge leaders face today. And he works with a leadership institute, and he says it's making decisions. People have such a hard time making decisions, and I think this is a part of that. And I wanted to come back to something you said, Jonathan, regarding Mike's question about recognizing there are some questionable companies in his mutual fund and whether he should move things around. he already has the answer, it sounds like. But two, you're culpable for what you know, but you're also culpable for what you should know. And sometimes I think we like to turn a blind eye or be, just ignorant and enjoy that, blissful ignorance. And so it's that reminder of, this is a little bit of a reminder as Catholics that our investments still need to be faith-centered. Our faith isn't just when we show up at church on Sunday and that's it. It even has to do with how we navigate our money. And that's why I love what you guys do at walletwin.com. If you want to check out their work, that's walletwin.com. Okay, so Lent is around the corner, and a lot of people often end up entering into no spending zones, knowing that this is an area where they are morally struggling. So what are your tips ahead of Lent for sprucing up your finances during the Lenten season?
I think using a financial aspect to your Lenten practices is a really good idea. We speak and teach and do what we do around money because we know from our personal experience, from seeing it in life after life of people we've worked with, that money touches nearly every part of your life. It touches your relationships with your spouse, with your kids, with your work. And so by focusing on maybe building up some virtue with your finances during Lent, it's a way of really building up virtue throughout a lot of your life. So yeah, you mentioned a couple of great, just really quick ideas of, no spending, or I'm going to cut out, this particular category of spending, or on this day, or whatever it might be. Maybe just, sometimes there is a little bit of a want to maybe use Lent as the Catholic second chance at a new year resolution. So maybe it's going to be start budgeting. All right, you know what? I mean, I was a little intimidated. I didn't think of it, or I fell off the wagon, budgeting in 2025. Well, okay. Lent gives us, it starts on I think the 5th of March. So there's the March budget. You're going to get most of a month right there. And then you get the April budget. So maybe we just commit to budgeting twice. Those 2 times, those 2 months, we're going to make a plan for how we're going to spend. That might be a good way to do it. But having some sort of financial goal would be helpful.
I would add one more thing. I think Lent is a time where people are naturally reflecting on their generosity, their giving. Fasting, penance, and almsgiving. These are things that we're going to be called to do during Lent. And a portion of almsgiving and tithing and any sort of charitable giving that we're doing, I think Lent is a great time to examine that. Are we actually giving sacrificially? A lot of people, when we read that scripture verse where, there's the widow who gives her whole livelihood, is how Jesus describes it when she gives away her money. And he kind of rebukes the people that come in and give from their surplus. And I just want to challenge people during Lent. I think you should try to give from your need. Don't just give money that wouldn't have really affected you at all. Give away money that you did need to go do this, that, or buy this or that other thing. And now you're giving a double gift. You're giving not only that financial contribution, but you are giving the coat you were going to buy for yourself this year and you're wearing last year's, even though it has a tear in the pocket. You're giving both of those things to Jesus and uniting your money to him in that way.
And I love that you mentioned that, because we also don't have to necessarily be disassociated from how we give. That giving might be by putting on a nice dinner for people who don't have a lot of connections in the area, not a lot of relationships, and being generous with that, really savoring and enjoying food. Food is a nice part of our community. Grant, it's Lent, so finding a balance, of course, there. But the money doesn't have to be so far away given. It can be with organizations, churches that you love, you believe in, and you're making that sacrifice. But it can also be used locally in ways that people directly within your community need. Maybe even a family member in need.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, the fasting, the penance, and the almsgiving. I think we think, time, talent, treasure. It's like, it just kind of gets thrown in there at the end, or we can maybe use the other two. Where I'm doing penance, I'm fasting. Maybe I don't have to do so much almsgiving. It's not pick one of the three. It's do all of the three. And so just an encouragement to do that. And we're mentioned a few ideas already.
I think confession's a really key part of discerning sacrifices going into Lent. And maybe just something, and you guys can shed more light on this, something to really ponder in doing those examination of conscience, pondering what your Lenten sacrifices will be is, what is my attachment to money? And I would love if you have maybe any tips for pondering and discerning that you give clients you work with, how to discern that attachment to money and whether it's healthy.
Yeah, we actually have a financial examination of conscience. So funny that you bring this up. And people can get it totally for free at walletwin.com/examination. But this is an all too often overlooked area in going to and preparing for confession. And if you actually look at, old pre-1962 missals where they actually have some confession preparation questions in there, you'll find a number of financially related questions. And so, because Jonathan said money touches every area of our life, oftentimes, if we're not bringing finances in some capacity to the confessional, it means we probably just haven't looked at our life enough, because there's probably money something stirring up in there, whether it's masking itself as envy or jealousy or fear or pride. It can kind of poke out of any one of those vices. But we do encourage people to do this examination of conscience with their finances in particular. So go over to walletwin.com/examination and you can get the entire printout, print it out, keep it in your car, keep it in your purse, and bring it to you when you actually go to the sacrament of confession.
Fantastic. And I'll link to that financial examination of conscience that you created. I'm looking forward to checking it out myself. So we'll add that in the show notes as well as posting it on social media. Just follow me at Timmerie, Timmerie, where we're also tagging Jonathan and Amanda at WalletWin. Their website is walletwin.com. Okay, quick question here. I think we have enough time. Susie from Rancho Cordova in California called. She said, I have 3 young adults living in my household between the ages of 19 and 24. One is working full time. 2 are working part-time. Should I be asking them to contribute to the household in some sort of way to prepare them for being on their own down the road? This is a heavy one.
I think, you said 2 are working full-time?
1 working full-time and 2 are part-time. And all of them are between the ages of 19 to 24.
Oh, yes, absolutely then. Definitely. Yes, of course. Get them ready as they move out. And go into the the rest of their lives, but I mean it's part of assuming that adult responsibility in life of contributing to the utilities or the groceries, whatever it might be. And you know what, maybe it's in the past, other generations, maybe it was a little harsh, just like okay, here, happy birthday, and you're kicked out. But we need to let out the string or whatever slowly, or gradually. Help that if you want to, you can help them ease into things. Okay, great. There's utilities that we have to pay, and we use this much electricity, or this much is what we pay for water. You're part of this household, so I'm going to ask you to contribute X% for these bills, and to help sit down and help them make a budget, to understand the money they have coming in, understand what they need to have out, make that plan, and just help them not just to maybe carry their own weight or anything like that, but to be successful, to be good, functioning, contributing adults when they're older.
Having them pay you is actually going to teach them the skills they need once they are launched. So I think it's a great practice.
And I'll just jump in too, because I'm not disagreeing, but maybe seeing a different viewpoint a little bit. I think it's circumstantial. I mean, her adult kids are 19 to 24, so likely in college or just getting their bearings, maybe preparing to move out. So 1, I think it's circumstantial. 2, I think this is where financial literacy needs to be gained at a much younger age. I mean, if they're just starting to learn about financial literacy and some self-responsibility with finances at that age, and that's part of the problem because I mean, my parents were extremely generous and helpful with us and starting out and getting into the seasons of lives that all of my siblings and I are in. And I think that there's a balance between enabling someone versus helping them to get set up. So I think there's a lot to that question that's very complex, but I like where you mentioned they do need to have these responsibilities to start contributing in some way. So that's Jonathan Amanda Texera from walletwin.com. Talk about a question. Much more to come from Jonathan Amanda sharing their adoption story in just a moment here on Trending.
So, what's trending? Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio and the Relevant Radio app.
Jonathan and Amanda Texera from walletwin.com are with me today. We are dovetailing topics. You guys, you shared last year the really exciting news when you had adopted. Is it your fourth child this past year?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Our fourth son joined us a year ago.
And I don't know much of your story, but it was really on my mind this week with the topic of infertility and IVF. And one thing so under discussed is adoption. While adoption is never the solution for people who want to have children, because adoption is about giving a home to a child who needs a home. It's a very different circumstance. But for some who have struggled like yourselves to conceive, this has been a place for you to provide a home, but also exercise motherhood and fatherhood. And so I'd love if you could share how you made your way to adoption to begin with.
Yeah, I'm glad you're bringing this up. You know, we've seen even this week just the conflicting reports about the Trump administration expanding access to IVF, et cetera. And, you know, I've seen people celebrating that online, but we as Catholics know, gosh, that's actually not pro-life at all. It's the opposite of. And I wish people knew more about adoption and about this path to growing their families. I get it. You know, we knew fairly early on in our marriage that we were likely up against permanent infertility due to some surgical adhesions and scar tissue that I had from previous surgeries before we got married. And so it made the journey pretty clear to us. Around our second wedding anniversary is when we dove headlong into the adoption process. And IVF at the time, it just wasn't even a temptation because we did know the church's teachings and we knew that children are a gift. They're not a right. They're not just something we can go create in a lab and then extract to make our lives better. And so we knew that. And so we began to seek out what are the options for us because we did feel called to be parents. You know, we were a complete family, you know, as a married couple, but we did feel that we had love that we wanted to share with someone else. And that so we started looking into foster care. We started looking into adoption. There's domestic, there's international. It can be pretty overwhelming, but we just began to kind of get in motion and start talking to people, hearing their stories. And it led us into pursuing domestic infant adoption. And what do you know, through my sister-in-law joining a Facebook group, we ended up connecting with our oldest daughter's birth mom, and that began the whole process. We welcomed home our first daughter and our oldest back just after our third wedding anniversary. And so that kind of kicked off the whole journey. And then we had a couple more miraculous situations come up in the next couple of years. So we adopted 3 times in 4 years. It was a little fast and furious there for a bit. And then we had quite the gap. But we felt called again to step back into the world of adoption because we saw that siblings are just such a gift to one another. And we felt like we still had that capacity, and we had, it felt like somebody was missing in our family. And so we went back down the adoption process again just last year. And, you know, we might go back in ourselves in the next year. We'll see, God willing. That's the plan.
Now, I know your first and your last baby were both newborns. Have you done infant adoption with all 4 of your children?
Yes, all 4 were adopted right after birth. We were I guess for the first,
In the
Amanda
room.
was in the room when she was born, and then but we've been at the hospital or right in town when they've been born. So yeah, fresh, still had the tags on when they came to us.
There's a lot of nervousness I've noticed recently Within the Catholic community, I know this is kind of maybe not the direction I was planning on going, but I'd be interested to hear your take because I've heard a lot of people, majority of my peers have faced serious infertility crosses. And one topic that's in my eyes a little sad that we're seeing right now is this avoidance of adoption out of fear of what could be brought into the home. And on one side, I get it because I've worked in the crisis pregnancy situation. I've been through adoption placements with moms in these circumstances, and they can come with really messy circumstances. And we also know today that open adoption, if possible, is ideally better for kids if that's possible. And so with all of that said, though, I'm seeing a lot of people who are saying, yes, I'd love to adopt, but I'm scared of what I would be bringing into my home. So I don't want to do that. And there's this very quick shut of even going down, even considering that path. And I'd love to hear some of your thoughts there.
So many thoughts. I don't want to send anybody just to go in blind to these scenarios because there are risks. There are challenges. One does not decide that they're going to make a placement for adoption without there being some very serious things going on in their life that are causing either severe stress or they're battling addictions or there's kind of chaos behind the scenes. And that all has an impact on the baby that is in utero. And to act like that's not happening at all would be naive. And that I think for a long time in the adoption world, that's almost how it was. But now with just the development of neuroscience, et cetera, we now are more aware that some of these kiddos who come from trauma or a hard background, they are probably going to have some struggles to one degree or another. But we have tools. We have tools to cope with those things. We have counseling. We have God's grace. We have parenting strategies. We've come a long way in being able to treat trauma, heal trauma. And then we always have, God's grace, which is something that you can't even measure, really. It's inestimable. And so I just want that sentiment that St. John Paul II always echoed out of do not be afraid. I really feel like if couples are facing infertility and they do desire to be parents, they need to lean into that do not be afraid mentality. They need to lean out into that and ask the Lord if he's calling them to this. And if he is, I get it. I get those fears are going to be very real, but take the step, take the leap. You just don't know what's going to be on the other side. And then I guess I want to end what I'm going to say, and you feel free to add anything that you want to add, Jonathan. But sometimes I'm struck when I hear the lives of the saints, like Father St. John Bosco, how he raised all those boys. And I guarantee you there was trauma. I guarantee you there was stress. I guarantee you all the issues we see right now, he probably did those. He had to coach those boys through it, parent them through it, love them through it. Sometimes knowing too much can paralyze us. And so I want to encourage people to look at the saints who've gone headlong into, parenting children that were not born to them. This is something that has been part of our Catholic tradition since the beginning. Adoption is even part of the Holy Family story. This is something that has been used in salvation history over and over and over again. And so it's important to God, and he's going to be with you if this is what he's calling your family to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's an interesting thing. I don't think I noticed it before we had adopted, but there is a lot of reference to adoption, even in the liturgy of the Mass. There's frequent reference to being, adopted into the family of God, being his adopted sons and daughters. And if you look back at it, like, at least I can speak for me, like, I'm not a Jew. I'm not one of God, the chosen people. I was adopted. I was grafted into this family tree. And I wasn't born there, but I'm a member of the family now. And so we, of God's people, of his children. And so that's our reality, all of us. And yes, our youngest is still a year old, so maybe we don't quite know, but I know from all of our kids, situations in life or, heck, all of us, we've all got something from the way we were raised or, what happened or didn't happen when we were young that we are still figuring out or needed to have figured out. And so, yeah, that's happening and will happen with our kids, but it's an invitation to love them. It's an invitation to not just pick up the guy on the side of the road and bring him to the inn and pay for his care, but to bring him home with you and to raise him up and to call him your son. It is a call, like any other. It's not for everybody, but I think it's probably for a lot more people than have answered it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just for couples who've experienced infertility either. And I want to say, without being too scoldy here, Protestants are running laps around Catholics around openness to children through adoption. I think in the Catholic world, it's right that our stance is just that we are inherently open to life biologically, absolutely. But I do think most couples don't even consider that adoption might also be an openness call unless they have infertility. And I want to challenge couples to just assume that God wants you to be open to grow your family, open to life in every possible way he might bring a new member into your family. And just assume that that openness extends well beyond biology.
I agree with you on that. I see it, especially coming from the pro-life community where I've been around a lot of my peers who have been from Protestant denominations. And even with, a whole nother topic and a whole nother discernment in and of itself, but the foster care. The foster care system's a mess, but we need to be there as Catholics. And what does that look like? Where's the responsibility? And I know you get back into that same question of, well, what am I bringing into my home? But I was just thinking, I have a friend right now who is in the process of trying to adopt a baby who she received as a newborn, and who for the last year plus has been in her home raising her, and now they're fighting to try and adopt this baby, and it started through the foster care system. And I admire that, because I think there's so much fear for so many of us to enter into that space of the unknown, having your heart broken as a parent trying to help love this kid, because there's a lot that you can't do in the foster system, and it's sometimes accepting as much good as you can do.
There's Fulton Sheen. There's I was working on a project about him, and there was a line in there where it was presented as, near the end of his life, he was in the hospital and just like bedridden, essentially, after some surgery and stuff. And even in that time was ministering to people. And I think it even like witnessed a couple marriages and like, crazy, like saint level stuff. But this piece included a quote of his talking about how he had been a priest, but it was only now where he was understanding to be the victim. And through that, a true understanding of his priesthood and his relationship with Jesus. And I think parenthood in general, maybe in some special ways, adoption or foster care, can invite some suffering into our lives. But we don't need to be afraid of suffering. We have the guide. We have, our God who loves us, who made us, and who went before us in all suffering and has made all things new. And so in that gift that we make when we die to ourselves and love, 1 John 3:16 says, this is how we know love, that Christ died for us, and we too are to die for the brethren. When we die for another and we give our life, right? Our lives aren't our own anymore, right? I'm focused, I want to do all I can for my kids. It's a new level of invitation into the mystery of Christ's suffering and making it real in me and making me more like him.
And I love that you mentioned that, Jonathan, kind of playing what Amanda said earlier. God's grace is supplied. You guys mentioned, God gave us the roadmap, and who of us in one way or another from the culture, from families of origin, don't have some sort of wound that we bring into a marriage, that we bring into how we parent our kids, that, these things that happen. That's why God is the perfect parent. I am not. And I pray by his grace that is what is the ideal and that he makes up for everything that I lack in parenting my kids. And I think that that's such a good testament. Here you guys are sharing 4 children via adoption as how you have grown your family and where you've been called into. For those who are maybe discerning adoption, or maybe you're afraid of the idea of it, what other words of wisdom would you have based on your own experience of 4 children from adoption?
I think the best advice that I could give somebody who's even considering this is just go have dinner with an adoptive family. Go out to coffee with a friend who this is part of their life. They're doing foster care. They've built their family through adoption. Mm-hmm. Hearing those stories was essential to our own discernment because we began to see ourselves kind of in some of these couples who had gone before us. And we could see that, okay, the same seeds that God planted in their heart that led them to this, he's already been planting in me. So I could kind of recognize those seeds, the watering and the growth that the Holy Spirit was putting in me. But I might not have been able to recognize that if I wasn't spending time around families who were immersed in this and that weren't living this as their story. So that's really what I would encourage people to do. I mean, Jonathan and I
just got a text like 2 hours ago from a buddy asking to come over and do exactly that.
I would say we probably spend 40 to 60 hours a year, either on Zoom or at our dinner table, coaching or counseling couples about adoption. It's not something we get paid for. It's just something we do because we want to be there for the couples that are discerning this and share our story.
One other thing is when I remember I was younger, I was asking, I met a seminarian and I said, well, how did you know you're supposed to be a priest? And he goes, well, I don't. All I know was I'm supposed to be a seminarian. And so maybe, like you don't need, oh, well, what if I had a kid like this or this situation? Just look into it. Just meet with somebody. Maybe just find an agency, fill out the application to get started. Like just take the next step that God's inviting you to. That's all you need to worry about. And in a sense, all you need to discern, just the next step I need to take. And then I'm going to trust that he's going to lead me on to the next one.
And that inspired me. You guys joined me last year after you adopted your 4th baby, about how to fundraise to adopt, because adoption is expensive, but it doesn't have to be, and different programs you've used and how you've come to each of your children. So I'm going to link to that episode in the show notes as well as on social media, because I think it's such an important topic. If there's fear surrounding how to find a baby and what the costs are. But that's been Jonathan and Amanda Texera. Thank you for joining us here at Relevant Radio, for sharing your story and for your generosity toward your children via adoption. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie. You can find them at walletwin.com. That's walletwin.com. They're Catholic financial coaches.